As previously discussed on this channel, the worlds of professional wrestling and of horror movies have a lot of crossover, and in some cases even more than many people might think. Take for example, with gimmicks. Yes, there are many scary gimmicks out there, but what some people might not realize is that a lot of them have followed suit with some famous horror movies out there. Like which ones, you ask? Well, that's the topic of this episode, because today... A big thank you for the support over on Patreon, Reflection of Perfection. If you want your own Patreon shoutout, then sign up over on my Patreon page. Gangrel would draw inspiration from multiple sources.
What? Are you stupid? Everyone knows that Gangrel drew inspiration from only one source and one source only.
You know, something can't have multiple answers. It's not all or nothing. You don't have to be so extreme with everything that you think and say. Oh no, we are nowhere smart enough to handle multifaceted ideas. We're the kind of commenters that demand that everything be one thing and one thing only. You'll just have to deal with it. Alright, how about you just hear me out for a change, okay? Anyway, as I was saying, the former Brood leader drew inspiration from multiple sources, primarily being named after a clan in the role-playing game Vampire the Masquerade. But of course, his little vampire posse also took some of their cues from the movie The Lost Boys. And not to mention that Gangrel's wardrobe is also somewhat reminiscent of the vampire Lestat and other characters from Anne Rice novels. Okay, now there you go. Was that so bad? I don't know. Sticking to just one idea is so much simpler.
Oh, what about Vampiro? What inspired him?
Ah yes, good question. Oh, that's easy. Vampiro's character was a vampire because, well, he sucks. Anyway, moving on. Believe it or not, after a stint in both ECW and WCW, somehow WWF didn't think that Cactus Jack was a marketable enough name. And so, instead of giving him his old gimmick from two different wrestling promotions, they decided to give him a character from two different movies. The former Cactus Jack Mick Foley entered WWE under a new name, Mankind, but originally he was supposed to be Mason the Mutilator. This gimmick was originally pitched as being a blend of two different movie characters. One, Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is why of course Foley wears a leather face, but also Hannibal Lecter, which the mask does also draw inspiration from. The name was then suggested to be changed to Mankind the Mutilator, as in someone who's going to mutilate all of mankind. This was eventually shortened to just Mankind itself, and thus we got Foley as many WWF Attitude Era fans have come to know him. And while the whole Leatherface Silence of the Lambs thing does make sense when you look back on Mick Foley's early days as Mankind, it seems kinda strange when you think about him in the Rock and Sock connection. And since then, Cactus Jack has become the name of the guy who designed the toys for the adult Happy Meals that people are going crazy over right now. Anyway, go figure. And we're still not done with Leatherface, and we're also not done with old ECW talent going into WWF and changing their name. And yes, I am aware of the claims that Terry Funk himself was the one who suggested that he be Chainsaw Charlie, but I don't care. A bad idea is a bad idea, no matter who it comes from. And having the legendary Terry Funk wrestle as someone other than Terry Funk is a bad idea. Anyway, anyone who is even remotely familiar with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise can easily see how the character of Chainsaw Charlie was influenced by Leatherface. The only difference is, instead of wearing leather on his face, it's pantyhose. And is it just me, or does the idea of someone bringing a chainsaw down to the ring seem like a inherently bad idea? Yes, I know they took the chain out, not the point. Anyway, just saying. For some reason, multiple parties have all taken credit for being the one to create the character of Doink, with Bruce Pritchard stating that he conceived the idea of a miserable clown character, to another story where Hawk from the Road Warriors saw Matt Bourne in the locker room looking surly and screamed, "Krusty the Clown," and then telling Vince McMahon that's what his gimmick should be. Now, regardless as to which story is true, and keep in mind, they actually could all be true in tandem with one another, there is a third version of the story, which again could also be true in conjunction with the other others, and it's that the character of Doink was inspired by the Stephen King character of Pennywise the Clown. The story of it began as a 1986 novel before it was made into a TV miniseries on ABC, which featured a star-studded cast. It was adapted yet again into 2 feature films in 2017. But of course, the idea of a scary clown is nothing new, as there are plenty of other characters that could have influenced Doink. Alright, real quick, before we continue with the list, allow me to ask that if you're enjoying this video that you please leave a like, and also make sure that you're subscribed to this channel, as it really does help me achieve my goal of getting to that silver play button, which I'm long overdue for, and I really do appreciate the help and support from all of you. Thanks so much. Anyway, back to the list. Dan Spivey is a wrestler that a lot of people who are very familiar with the industry definitely know, but outside of that, he never really garnered too much success, as casuals probably don't know who he is. Now, out of his many gimmicks, including being the Starship Eagle as well as being part of the Skyscrapers, for today we're going to be looking at his character of Waylon Mercy during his time in the WWF. This gimmick took its cue directly from Robert De Niro's portrayal of Max Cady in the film Cape Fear, directed by Martin Scorsese, which was actually a remake of a 1962 film of the same name, which itself came from the 1957 novel The Executioners. Anyway, one thing that I think we all have to admit is that it takes a very certain kind of guy to be able to pull off making a Hawaiian shirt look threatening. But now, even though this character really wasn't too successful and really didn't have a lot of lasting effects on many fans, it would come back in a very different way years later. But that leads us to... Now, for many fans, the first time they saw Bray Wyatt was as Husky Harris as part of the Nexus group. Not flattering for sure. However, he would thankfully re-emerge as the character of Bray Wyatt, who was yet someone else that was inspired by Max Cady from Cape Fear. But relax for anyone who thinks this is a case of Bray Wyatt ripping off Waylon Mercy, because it was allegedly Dan Spivey, the former Waylon Mercy himself, who suggested that Wyatt use the gimmick, and also because, well, remember, the character was taken from a movie, so let's not get all high and mighty with originality points here. Anyway, if this story is true, that means that Dan Spivey figured to himself, I don't care if I can't get over with it, somebody's gonna make this gimmick work. And of course, Bray Wyatt, as creative as he is, takes influence from many different sources, but that's going to take us to our next entry. Yep, we're still on Bray yet again, but this time it's his character of The Fiend. Now this came from a lot of different sources. Not only was the character of Mercy the Buzzard a reference to his old character of Bray Wyatt, and of course that's a reference to Waylon Mercy, but the Fiend gimmick also took cues from other places as well, such as Mr. Robot, Mr. Rogers, and the Joker, particularly the storyline where Joker had his face removed in the comics. The parallel, of course, was only made stronger once he got his own personal Harley Quinn in Alexa Bliss. But now that Bray's back, I wonder if they're gonna address the whole situation with Alexa, or are they just gonna pretend like it never happened? Personally, I hope it's the latter. Alright, so here's the one that many of you may not know, but back in 1990, Clive Barker wrote and directed a film called Nightbreed, which is certainly not the most well-known film to say the least. In this story, the main character ends up in a city for monsters named Midian, which is where Dennis Knight, the former pig farmer, got his name from. Now this gimmick would eventually devolve into Naked Midian, but you know, the less spoken about that the better. And also, this character change to Midian happened after his run in Southern Justice, which I still stand by was a good gimmick, and I wish it had a little more time. And yes, I am aware that Dennis Knight is a chef now. I mentioned it in a recent video. Anyway, let's move on. And lastly, we have the big red machine, Kane. Okay, so where to begin with this one, since Glenn Jacobs can source a lot of different places as the inspiration for this character. First and foremost, the idea of a brother named Kane comes from the Bible. And secondly, the character's other influences include Michael Myers from the Halloween franchise, as well as Jason from Friday the 13th. And in a bonus entry, a lot of people say that this was his older brother's influences as well. You know, also coupled with a whole Old West motif. But I guess this really isn't too surprising, as big lumbering monsters tend to take their cues from one another. Well, there you go, professional wrestling gimmicks that were inspired by horror movies. Which one of these are your favorite? Let me know down in the comments, and please make sure that you're subscribed to this channel and that you have a happy Halloween. And as always, Dave knows.